First and foremost, I want to say thank you to my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. If it wasn't for him, this wouldn't be possible. Low nose boxing. So you already know what to do. Hit the like button, share the video, leave a comment, subscribe to my channel, Low Nose Boxing. So I have something very interesting that I want to speak about right now. I'm going to speak about Danny Swift Garcia. Danny Swift Garcia of North Philadelphia, Puerto Rican fighter from Philadelphia. Shout out to Danny Garcia. Now, my question will be followed at the end of the video with my answer. When Danny Garcia retires, at the end of the day, will Danny Garcia go into the Hall of Fame? Well, first off, as far as his accolades go, it's pretty solid. Danny Garcia is a former 2-division champion. He was the unified champion at junior welterweight, which is 140 pounds. He also was a former WBC welterweight champion as well. A belt that he took it from Robert Guerrero. It was a vacant title, but we're going to talk about his 140-pound run. And before we talk about that, Danny Garcia as an amateur was very impressive. Danny Garcia has an extensive amateur pedigree. He fought Terrence Crawford twice and won one fight and lost another fight. He also took on Mikey Garcia, right? So Danny Garcia, despite the fact that he had an amateur pedigree, an extensive and impressive amateur pedigree, Danny Garcia was not a highly touted prospect on the way up. He wasn't a fighter that was groomed for greatness. He wasn't a fighter that was fast-tracked, sort of like a Shakur Stevenson or Teofimo Lopez. Guys like that were like prospects of the year. Danny Garcia was never considered a prospect of the year. He was just a solid fighter with a solid pedigree. So Danny Garcia won his first world title against Erik Morales. Erik Morales is a Hall of Famer. Erik Morales, despite the fact was past his prime, he was sort of resurgent. He became a champion at 140 pounds. He was starting to get some momentum back in his long, illustrious career. So Danny Garcia beat Erik Morales and then went on to fight Amir Khan. At the time, Amir Khan was a fighter who people were lining up to eventually face off against Floyd Mayweather Jr. Amir Khan was a 7-1 favorite going into that bout. It was a unification fight, and Danny Garcia was a 7-1 underdog. Danny Garcia knocked out Amir Khan in 3 rounds, right? That was an upset. But still, the respect from the boxing public was eluding Danny Garcia because the narrative was Danny Garcia landed a lucky shot. So he went on to have a rematch against Erik Morales. He knocked out Erik Morales in devastating fashion. Then he took on Zab Judah, another proven fighter, another fighter with incredible accolades. In a tough 12-round fight, Danny Garcia defeated Zab Judah. And then he went on to fight Lucas Matthysse. Going into that fight with Lucas Matthysse was the favorite. Lucas Matthysse was on a roll. Lucas Matthysse was knocking dudes out. The fight prior to fighting Danny Garcia, Lucas Matthysse had knocked out Lamont Peterson in 3 rounds. He knocked him out more impressively than Errol Spence or anybody else did for that matter. A lot of skeptics were believing that Danny Garcia was going to duck Lucas Matthysse. I mean, they were making memes because Danny Garcia was front row at that fight. He had the sunglasses on and people were making it seem like he was scared, like he was shook. But Danny Garcia fought Lucas Matthysse, and he beat Lucas Matthysse decisively. He outboxed him, he busted his eye, he dropped him. And after that fight, Lucas Matthysse was never the same fighter. Danny Garcia eventually went on to fight against Mauricio Herrera in Puerto Rico. A fight that he won, but a fight that he wasn't impressive. A fight where there was a lot of skeptics behind that fight. There's a lot of people that believe that Danny Garcia did not deserve the victory. And then he fought Rob Salka in a tune-up fight. After that tune-up fight with Rob Saka, Danny Garcia his momentum went down. His momentum went all the way up when he beat Lucas Matisse. But after the Mauricio Herrera fight, his momentum kind of went down. People were labeling Danny Garcia as a cherry picker. Now, Danny Garcia fought a lot of great fighters, right? Like after he fought against Rob Saka, he took on Lamont Peterson, another tough, close fight. Throughout his career, Danny Garcia done fought guys like the guys I mentioned. And before that, he fought against Kendall Holt. He fought against Nate Campbell. At 147, he took on Robert Guerrero, who he defeated for the WBC Welterweight Championship. Danny Garcia took on Adrian Granados. He was the first fighter to stop Adrian Granados. Adrian Granados was highly durable. Danny Garcia's only losses were to the top dogs at 147 pounds. He lost to Keith Thurman in a close fight. He lost to Sean Porter in a very close fight. That specific fight, I actually scored it for Danny Garcia in a close fight. The most decisive loss that Danny Garcia took was against Errol Spence Jr. But even in that fight, Danny Garcia was still competitive. He was still competitive. Danny Garcia has an incredible resume. And then he also beat Jose Benavidez last July 2022, right? He beat Jose Benavidez, July 2022. So Danny Garcia won fights as an underdog. And like I said before, he got a solid resume. He got solid accolades. And if you think about it, Danny Garcia may very well be the most durable Puerto Rican champion ever that I can recall. And I say that because most Puerto Rican fighters from the past, they all had some sort of physical vulnerability. Miguel Cotto, for instance, been dropped a few times. He been rocked a few times. Felix Trinidad been rocked a few times, dropped more than a few times. Wilfredo Gomez been dropped. Edwin Rosario been dropped. Danny Garcia has never been rocked. He's never been staggered. He probably been knocked off balance before, but I've never seen Danny Garcia buckle. So it's pretty much safe to say that Danny Garcia also has one of the best chins in boxing. And mind you, he been in there with some guys that can crack. He got hit hard and solid by guys like Lucas Matisse, Keith Thurman, Kendall Holt, Zab Judah, and Errol Spence Jr. All those guys can punch, right? All those guys can punch. And he also cleaned out 140 pounds as well. Because the guys at 140 pounds during that time, right, were Zab Judah, Eric Morales, Kendall Holt, Amir Khan, Lucas Matisse, Brandon Rios, Mauricio Herrera. Danny Garcia fought and beat all those guys. He eventually fought Brandon Rios at 147 pounds. So he left no stones unturned. So when it comes down to it, when it's all said and done, is Danny Garcia going to be a Hall of Famer someday? And my answer is absolutely. Based on what he did at 140 pounds. At 147 pounds, if he was a welterweight his whole career, then I would say no. He had some solid wins at 147 pounds, but when he fought the top dogs, he lost those fights. So for me, Danny Garcia is going into the Hall of Fame based on what he did at 140 pounds and based on the fact that he was never demoralized. Based on the fact that he was never demoralized. Danny Garcia is actually fighting December 9th against Erislandy Lara, a former middleweight champion. If Danny Garcia pulls that off, that's going to be icing on the cake to an already great career, right? And I'm going to go on the limb to say this. Not only is Danny Garcia a Hall of Fame fighter somewhere down the road, I believe he'll make it into the Hall of Fame. I'm going to go on the limb to say that if Danny Swift Garcia was an actual Puerto Rican from the island of Puerto Rico, I'm going to place Danny Garcia in the top 10 list among the greatest Puerto Rican fighters of all time. somewhere in the bottom of the list, maybe 9 or 10. And y'all probably looking at me like I'm crazy, right? I personally believe that Danny Garcia had a slightly better career than Edwin Rosario, who is a Hall of Famer, who is on my top 10 all-time Puerto Rican list. And guess what else? Danny Garcia, unlike most Puerto Rican fighters, is actually undefeated in the legendary rivalry between Puerto Rico and Mexico. So he gets points for that. The only other great Puerto Rican fighter to my knowledge that is undefeated in head-to-head bouts against Mexicans is Felix Trinidad. Danny Garcia has wins over Erik Morales. He has wins over Mauricio Herrera. He has wins over Robert Guerrero, Adrian Granados, Brandon Rios, and Jose Benavidez. So you got to give him points for that. And he has a big fight coming up December 9th against Erislandy Lara for the Middleweight Championship. A slick, highly skilled Cuban veteran fighter. If Danny Garcia pulls that off, that's another notch under his belt. That's another notch. That's another accolade right there. And I'm rooting for Danny Garcia. He's Puerto Rican. He's from North Philly. So I got to rock with him. Shout out to DSG. So with that being said, hit the like button, share the video, subscribe to my channel, Low Nose Boxing, because Low Nose Boxing, pa que tú lo sepas.